So I said in last week's introduction, I'm actually working on two bigger projects. I have multiple things going on for the holidays. I don't film all those projects, I just don't have the time. The two big pieces I'm working on, one's a built-in and the other is actually a Christmas gift for one of my neighbor's wives. So even though I'm farther along with that piece, I decided to do the built-in because I don't want to ruin any surprises before the holidays. I've actually been surprised. Sometimes I'll be working on a piece and a customer will tell me they watched part of it in the video. People I didn't know were following me. So just to be on the safe side, I'll post that one after the holidays. Like I said, this is a built-in. I have a couple built-in videos already on the channel, but because this channel is mostly client-based projects, because this is a business that I run, I can't really pick and choose what comes down the pike as far as what people want. So for this one, the last couple built-ins I kind of ran through pretty quickly because I already have videos up. For this one, I tried to focus more on measurements. I get a lot of comments about people wanting to know the sizes of stuff and whatnot, and because I work off of pictures and visuals in my head, I don't really write down a lot of measurements. I'm not working off of a schematic. I'm not working off of blueprints the majority of the time. So for this, and even though everyone's house is going to be different, and the nice thing about built-ins is because they're so different, I've made a bunch of them at this point, but no two have been exactly alike. I tried to focus more on how I took measurements, how I laid things out, and decided the height, depths, and widths of all of the projects so that if you want to build something like this in your space, you have a little bit more of a grounding on how I go about deciding all of that stuff. Like I said, I tried to do it. I tried to write down more measurements and take more notes of why I made something as wide as I did and so forth and whatnot. So I hope people get a little bit out of that, considering that I already have multiples of these up on the channel. So I start all of my built-ins the same way by building a frame base for all the cabinets to sit on. The reason for this is twofold. Number one, no house is the floor is going to be perfectly flat and square, so it's much easier to level a frame base than the entire built-in. Once you level the base, the built-in will sit on it level. And the other reason is most people, I think all of these I've ever done, they want to match the existing baseboards on the bottom, so this will give you a place to attach it to without losing any space in the cabinets. So this is 2x6s because the baseboard's going to be pretty big on this one. It's about 5 1/4. The lumber quality nowadays is terrible, so what I'm doing is just ripping off both edges so these pieces are a little more square. I'm also going to rip off the ends because they're not square. Usually I don't take as many precautions when building because it's not super imperative that the ends are square, but these ones were really off. So then the entire built-in's about 157 feet, and once I took off the ends, I was left with 94 3/4. So this is going to be in two parts. The built-in's a little over 13 feet, so I could have bought 16-foot lumber and made one large base, but getting that in the room and situated would have been such a pain. So I made it in two pieces that I could attach with a couple screws, take it apart for transport, and then reattach it in the space. So that's why I'm making two sections. Same process, I'm cutting down the ends and then cutting those pieces because like I said, one's going to be the 94 and the other one's going to be the 67. Once that's done, I have a shim set up and I'm cutting the inner pieces. This depth is going to be the depth of my cabinets plus my face frame, and then you subtract 3 inches because the wood's about 1.5 inches thick. So once you subtract those 3 inches, that's the width of those inner pieces. I clamp all this together and screw this together. So this cabinet's a little over 12 inches wide. So with the thickness of the doors and all of that, this is about This is about 11 1/4 wide, the bases, so the doors will actually overhang the base. And then you can see these do not have to be perfect. You obviously want them to be as square as possible, but this does not have to be perfect. But I do like to go through, line up centers, and make it look kind of nice. So then in the shop, my floor is not level. You could see just how unlevel it is. So it takes a little bit of time to set this up, get this level side to side as well as front to back, because I'm going to be building the cabinets on top of this. If this isn't level, none of my cabinets will be level. So you can see all the shims I have to put in place. I have it put together with a clamp. You can see that it's level, and I just sunk some screws to connect these 2.5-inch screws. When you take the clamp off, nothing moves. So that is the base I'm going to be working off of. So the customer actually has it built in the space. This is what it looks like, and they're just updating it. That large piece with the cuckoo clock on it is actually an HVAC duct, so unfortunately that's going to have to be recreated, that kind of big flat facade. But he's changing it so the bottom's going to be all cabinets. So that drawing you saw the customer actually provided to me. He said he would make me a drawing. I didn't argue. It saves me time. And what I'm showing now is just that I make this a little shy of the width of the room, because you're going to want a little bit of play. But I shimmed out those two edges with a 3/8-inch piece of wood so that the measurements I put on the base are as close to accurate as possible. This first measurement is going to be where that container for the duct sits. So then I have the duct marked, and I'm going to be putting a 3-inch face frame on all of these. So that's just marking where the cabinet will end and where the face frame will begin. I'm kind of matching the face frames of the original photo. I'm not making them as big, but that was part of the style that wanted to be kept, as well as the fact that because of that duct, it was nice to have a little bit of play. So with a 3-inch face frame, you're going to have lots of play on either end of this in order to get everything to fit into the space. So I'm just showing you where that cabinet and the face frame is going to come to. So they're getting rid of that piece of molding under the window, and this is going to come all the way to the base of the window. So the math for that is pretty simple. I have the measurements from the room, which is 24 5/8 to the bottom of that windowsill. And then I just subtract the base that I made as well as the thickness of the top. So you can see I have the base -5, the top -3/4. That leaves me with 18 7/8. I'm going to make all of my cabinets 18 3/4. Once again, because you're probably going to have to shim the base a little bit, so I'm giving myself an 1/8 inch of play between shimming the base and the underside of the windowsill to get that math right. So all of the cabinets, you can see there's 3 on one side and then 1 straggler on the other. And then the depth of those is going to be 10 1/4, because the face frame's 3/4 inches of a thickness, and the door will also be 3/4 to give me a total of about 12 1/4, which is what the current built-in is, and we're keeping it about the same. So that is the basic math: 18 3/4 tall, 10 3/4 deep. So pretty simple stuff. I have 3/4 inch birch veneer ply that I'm just going to rip down into I believe I ripped these down to 10 3/4, and then once I do that, I can just cut all of my pieces to 18 3/4, and that will give me what I need. Now for the top, I don't do solid top, so with this little piece that was left over, I cut it into 3-inch strips, and those will be for all the top of the cabinets. It makes them a little lighter, and you don't see the top anyway, so usually I just put 3-inch strips up there. This math worked out perfectly with the plywood for these bottom cabinets, to have just enough left over to cut those strips. Once that was done, like I said, I'm now cutting these to 18 3/4, so I have a stop on the table, and I can cut all of those, doing the 3 cabinets at once because the one on the other end is going to be a different side. So for the top, I'm just showing you I'm cutting 3-inch rabbets at the top, but I'm also going to have a 1/2-inch backer on the back in a rabbet, so the one top is going to be 3.5 versus 3. And then I'm mirroring these cuts, so the 3 boards will be identical and the other 3 boards will be identical. You don't cut 6 identical boards or your backs will be in the wrong spot. I also put a dado at the bottom about an inch from the bottom. So this is that dado. You can see I'm just cutting it with a dado stack. This plywood is not 3/4 of an inch. It's usually about 23-30 so I have to use the shims that come with the dado stack. In order to get a perfect fit, I go about halfway through. The reason you leave a little lip at the bottom versus a flat base is just because the plywood's not going to be perfectly flat. So it will be more flat if it's only resting on 2 pressure points versus the entire flat bottom of the cabinet. So in order to cut these, I kind of lay them. I cut one and then the other one I'll lower onto the dado stack. You can rip a dado off the top. I just like to keep things nice and clean without a bunch of gaps. Plywood's just unsightly if you see through it. So I usually take the time to lower this onto the blade and cut grooves, and then my 3-inch topper will fit in there perfectly. So you can see I'm lowering it on and cutting the top and the back right up to my lines, and that's what that's left with. Now obviously, because this is a circular blade, it's going to leave an arch cut, and I just take the time to chisel those out. So I still have my dado stack in there. That's the 23-30, but nice throat in my sacrificial fence, so I just slide it over to a 1/2 inch and I could cut the rabbets in the back without changing out the dado stack. Once again, 3 of these I'm sending top side forward, the other 3 I'm sending bottom side forward, so the rabbets on 3 side is the opposite of the rabbets on the other 3 cabinet sides. I do like to mention that because I have cut these wrong before. So you're basically making 3 identicals and 3 identicals, and that's what I'm left with. You can see the rabbets on opposite sides for each 3, and there's my top pieces and my bottoms. So then, like I said, I go through. Sometimes I don't chisel this out, sometimes I just cut the pieces long, but like I said, it's worth it. It looks a little bit nicer when it's chiseled out, and it's pretty easy work just cutting down that arch. Now you can make cabinets with pocket hole screws. I prefer to do it this way because I like that the cabinet holds itself together. So with one person working, it just makes life easier. It squares itself up if you're cutting all these parts at once. They're going to be pretty identical. You can see how my 3-inch piece, I just use a little piece to make sure it's accurate. And they're going to be more durable when you have this much glue surface and all of these solid joints. So like I said, I go about 3/8 of an inch deep into the piece. So in order to get my width, I'm subtracting 3/4, 3/8 and 3/8 on either side is 3/4. And then I could go through. Now I ripped all of these to 10 3/4, I believe was the original measurement. So the shelf is not going to be as wide because you have the backer. It's going to be a 1/2 inch shorter. So I just went through and ripped a 1/2 inch off. Take the edge off because, like I said, the plywood isn't square these days either, and then I could just go through and cut all of my shelves. So that these are a little bit longer than setting up a stop and cutting them repetitively. And now I have all of my parts. So then I could just dry fit all of these pieces together. You can see how nice my grooves, all the pieces fit in there. It's very important, especially if you're putting face frames on cabinets, that the front edge of all of these parts is flat and flush and on the same plane, so you don't have gaps in between your face frame. And that's how those pieces sit on top. You can see this one's a little bit pushed back, but I have enough room to pull it to the front. And the base as well is nice and flush, and the back same thing. I could fit the whole 1/2 inch backer. So I had them just resting in place. You can see everything's nice and square. The sides match up. They match up with the marks I had originally put down. So I have just enough room to put that 3-inch face frame in the front to the edge. So I give myself plenty of space to scribe this into the room. And that's basically what that looks like. So now I could, all of these 3 are identical. And I could start on the other one. Same process. It's 33 from the edge of the wall to the beginning of that duct. So I could calculate for the 3-inch face frame on either side. Once again, I have that piece on the edge that has it shimmed out so I can get accurate measurements, but I could remove it when I bring it into the space. So I have about 3/8 of an inch play on either side, which you're going to want because the chances of the room being square, even front to back, is pretty inaccurate. So if you measure the front of a built-in on site and then you go to put it in the back of the room, those back corners are probably going to be narrower, and sometimes pieces won't fit if you don't give yourself that breather room. So I was basically just showing how all of my marks are lining up, and I could calculate for how wide that cabinet's going to be based off of the gap for the duct, which was 14 and I think 3/8, and I came up with 27 inches for that cabinet. I'm not going to show building it. It's the exact same process. It's just a couple inches less wide. So I like to put, this cabinet's obviously getting face frames, and I like to attach my face frames with splines. Once again, it's a little bit more work than other methods of doing it, but the initial work you put in pays dividends in the end because the face frames go right on and they're super solid. So I don't always do it this way, but I decided to cut all of my splines on the table saw before I put them together. The face frame material is about 3/16. It's 1/4 inch ply, but it's 3/16. So that's all I did was cut a 3/16 inch groove on all of the front edges of my pieces before gluing them together. Once that was done, I could measure for the backer and cut the backer. The backer is going to be the same thing, 1/2 inch birch veneer ply. I always put a backer on built-ins. It just shores up the piece. Even though they're technically attached to the room, I don't like cabinets without backers. You're asking for trouble down the line. And I do 1/2 inch because it makes the whole thing a little bit sturdier, especially when you're building stuff like bookcases and whatnot, which is going to go on the top of this. You usually have spans that are fairly wide, and the 1/2 inch just really shores up the piece. So same process, I had this cut down to height, and then I could just cut all the pieces, and that's what the backer looks like in place. Once that's in place, I could glue all these together. The really nice thing about built-ins, at least part of this built-in, you're never going to see the sides, the bottoms, the tops, or the backs. So you have a lot of liberty with how you put this together. For me, that means using screws because you're never going to see them. I don't have enough clamps to clamp all these together, and the screws basically act like clamps. As you can see, I countersink a bunch of holes before I put this together, and then I could just put glue in that dado and then just start assembling this, making sure, like I keep saying, that that front plane of the cabinet is all the same. So just go through and sink screws through all of my holes. It will shore up the cabinet as it dries, and like I said, you won't see them. I could add the top, add some screws, and then just slowly assemble this with screws. The backer I put in place at the exact same time because the backer will square up the cabinet. Until you put that backer on, even with all the screws and the glue, this is kind of like a parallelogram. It wants to shift to one plane or the other. That backer shores it up. I make sure it's square by measuring my diagonals, and I do put a chalk line across the back, especially if I'm doing a bookshelf and there's a bunch of shelves to screw into. If you put a chalk line, you could easily tell where all those screws are going to go. I just sink a bunch of screws in, and then these are super solid. I let them dry, clamp together, because even though I built these separately, because this is a little over 8 feet, so I had to make 3 separate cabinets. It would have been easier to make one long one, but I couldn't find over 8-foot ply. I know they sell 10-foot ply, but anyway, I'm going to permanently screw those together and move that as one cabinet just to save time. So then for the face frame, I'm just using poplar. I'm cutting this down. The face frame is going to be the exact same height. You can see 18 3/4, and my face frames are going to be 3 inches. So once again, I'm ripping off a little bit of an edge and then ripping off the other edge so that this is as square as possible. I usually don't do this, but the quality of lumber, like I keep saying, is really subpar these days. And then I could cut these into my 3-inch strips. Now after I did this, I realized with my one edge, it's not a problem in the middles because I have that 3-inch overhang, so I could use cabinet hinges for face frames, but on my edges they're going to be flush. Now you can buy 2 separate sets of hinges. I have done that in the past because the hinges for that edge is basically a frameless cabinet, and you buy frameless hinges, to make my life easier and use all the same hinges on the doors, I decided to just go and recut my ends so they were more like almost 4 inches to add, so I had an extra lip on the inside in order to do those hinges. I ended up using the pieces I didn't use for cabinet doors, so there wasn't any waste. Then I could go through on this middle piece here and mark where my splines need to be cut so that I could add the spline material and line it up. And you can see on the edge it's going to be in the exact same place. I'm just going to be cutting 1 on the edge instead of 2. It will give me that 3/4 inch lip on the edge as well. So the spline material is the same 3/16 inch ply. So I'm cutting 2 grooves first. You can see they're going to be the exact same, so I could have the fence set, cut one side, flip it around, and cut the other. And then for my edges, I'm just cutting 1 spline, obviously, because I'm not going through 2 cabinets. I can adjust the fence to my new mark, set everything in place, and then just cut the second groove, and that will give me that 3/16 inch spline. I'm going to test it with a little piece of ply I have over there to make sure it's wide enough, and then I could go through and just finish cutting all of these. The spline material, like I said, I just cut it in long strips and then cut it with some aviator snips to fit in place. As you can see, it's just cut with some aviator snips. It's a little over 1 inch with the thickness going into the cabinets and the thickness of the poplar. And like I said, this is a little bit more work than building face frames with pocket screws, which you can do. But if your cabinets are square, the face frames are so easy to put in place, and then it makes your face frame square, and it makes putting your doors that much easier to put in place, and it's something that will never pop off. Those are on there for good. So the tops and the bottoms of these face frames are going to be 1 inch because I made that dado 1 inch up from the bottom of the piece. So you can see I just cut some strips of poplar, that's 1 inch. Same thing, I could hold it in place. You can see it's perfectly flush with the bottom of the cabinet. Mark where that groove's going to be and then cut the grooves the exact same way. Start with 1 cut, the blade's going to cut 1/18 of 1 inch, and then I can move it slightly and cut the rest to get that 3/16. So you see I'm just adjusting it ever so slightly. I'll test it with a piece of that plywood I have to get it just right. And then I have a whole stack. Now these are obviously oversized for the cabinets. As I'm gluing the face frames together, I'll cut these on the radial arm saw to size. So to have gravity work on my side for at least a little bit, I'm going to glue all this together face down. Glue goes in the groove, the spline goes in, and then glue goes on the top as well. So you can see how strong these face frames are going to be, and everything at this point is nice and square. Once I have the edges on, I could add the spline material to the rails, and then I could just measure and cut for those top sides. Now this measurement should be exact. Mine were. If it's not exact, within a little bit, I would say 1/16 of 1 inch is pushing it. You could probably work with it, but if you made your cabinets properly, you cut your splines properly, those measurements top and bottom should be exactly the same. So I took the measurement, I went and cut 2 pieces on the radial arm saw, attached them. Once again, checking for square, everything's square. This is the point where you want to fix things if they're not square. It's worth it to take it apart and wipe off the glue and start over, because attaching the doors will be a nightmare if these openings aren't square. And then once again, I'm using a chalk line just because this is kind of teetering on the edge there, and I could attach a bunch of brads. This is going to be painted, so brad holes are very easy to fix. And then I didn't film it, but I did the exact same thing to this long cabinet. Came in the next day and just sanded the excess glue off the top, and then on top of this is going to be a nice piece of premium pine that's going to be stained, and that's probably where I'll pick up for the next video.